Archives of Prasar Bharati presents the timeless treasure of golden era.
We would like to know the various awards and distinctions conferred on you.
I consider myself extremely fortunate in that respect. I have received the Sahitya Akademi Award in 1980. I have also received several cash awards from the Kerala Sahitya Akademi, Government of Madras, the Writers Cooperative, and similar organizations. I was conferred the Sahitya Nipuna Gold Medal by the Assembly of Learned Persons at Tripunithura in 1958. I was also awarded the Sahitya Ratna Gold Medal by the Learned Assembly at Patambi in 1968. At present I am a fellow of the Kerala Sahitya Akademi. I had been an emeritus fellow of the Department of Education, Government of India, a senior fellow of Dravidian Linguistic Association. The University of Calicut had conferred on me an emeritus professorship, which due to various other preoccupations I could not accept. That way I have also received a Tamarapatra from the Government of India for my participation in the political struggle. That way I have been exceptionally fortunate in the matter of awards and honors.
And you visited the Soviet Union in connection with the Soviet
Yes, I received the Soviet Land Nehru Award and visited Soviet Union. Before that, as a journalist, I had also had an opportunity to spend 2 weeks in Soviet Union with some eminent journalists.
That is on the rather semi-official side. What about your activities with the public organizations like the Sahitya Samiti and Kendra Kala Samiti?
Oh yes.
And the trade unions?
I had been connected with various organizations from a very early date. I was the secretary of an association of Sanskrit scholars in the state of Cochin, of which Parikshit Tamburan, who later became the Maharaj of Cochin, was the president. Then I had been the secretary of Cochin Teachers Association. I was very active in the teachers movement for some time. I was also the secretary for long of Malabar Kendra Kala Samiti, which organized and unified the activities of various regional Kala Samitis in the Malabar area and conducted yearly drama festivals. I was also the secretary of founder secretary of Sahitya Samiti, the literary organization with which most of the eminent writers, not only eminent writers, the younger writers also were there, were associated. I was the secretary of Sahitya Samiti for long. Even now I continue my association with Sahitya Samiti. I was also the president of the Sahitya Pravartaka Cooperative Society, Kottayam. Professionally, I had been very active in the Working Journalists Union movement. I was also president for a term of the Kerala Union of Working Journalists. That way I had been associated with various trade union organizations and also learned societies for long.
Now, what are your impressions as a worker in the cultural field for a long time?
Impressions means there is a vast scope in that field, because along with the political freedom, if our society is to be modernized, a lot of modernization is required. In the cultural field also, the language has to be developed as a modern vehicle of scientific information. Then the society, most of the arts are even now based on rituals, and these have to be adapted to modern conditions, made into useful and efficient media of entertainment and instruction, and very little is being done in this field. That way it is a very fertile field which requires the attention and continuous effort of a large number of workers. That is my idea about it.
Do you think there is something like essential Indian culture which is going to survive or going down?
India as a nation had a long glorious tradition and a unique historical experience. The people of India have passed through all sorts of vicissitudes of destiny and during millennia they have gathered the essentials of spiritual experience. There is no doubt about it. By spiritual I mean also aesthetic, moral, all those things. So definitely I think India has a distinct culture, very relevant even now, and which has added to the richness of the world culture, and it has a great future also as a sobering element in the emerging world culture.
We know one of the reliable sources to clarify doubts on Vedic literature and Vedic language. How far is this essential Indian culture rooted in the Vedas?
Indian history has been to a very large extent discontinuous, in the sense there had been various invasions and violent changes in the dynasties, dislocation of peoples and all those things. The early Vedic language, then the classical Sanskrit language emerged, then Prakrit and Pali, all those languages had their field day. Gradually the modern languages emerged. Then there were the intrusion of foreign languages like Persian and English. Well, that way there have been a number of discontinuities in the development of Indian culture. But with all that, the intellectuals had always been looking back into the sources, and that way there is a distinct continuity is visible in the Indian experience, in the Indian culture, in the Indian way of thinking and looking at things.
How will it face the challenge of, say, the 21st century of technology?
Can't say, because the development of technology is unpredictable. We don't know what is going to happen. But then with all these developments, with all these modifications of the actual living conditions, I think the essential needs of human psyche will remain the same, and religion, philosophy, art, culture, this will have a very definite place in any society, even though it may be a technological society or a high technological society or anything like that. And in these fields India's contribution has been very significant, and their relevance has not been lost.
Now, coming to your career as poet and dramatist and critic, do you feel that you have been able to present this vision of culture, of Indianness, of challenges?
I cannot answer that question either yes or no, because when I began to write, I started writing poetry. Then poetry I conceived as an instrument of spreading nationalism, the message of nationalism. I was soaked, to say, in the national revolutionary ideas. The poetry which made the first impact on me was the poetry of Vallatol, the greatest nationalist poet of Malayalam, of Kerala. Then there was Kumaranajan. When I acquired some acquaintance with other languages and literatures, there was the Gandhian literature, then the writings of Bengali writers like great novelist Bankim Chandra, Tagore, Sarath Chatterjee, Hindi writers like Premchand. Well, these were the early influence on me. There was also Tolstoy. That way I conceived literature as a very powerful instrument of introducing a cultural revolution or a mental change or modernization of outlook, something like that. And I felt that unless literature, whatever piece is written, does not fulfill that purpose to some extent, then that piece is futile. That way, much of my poetry was, to begin with, concerned with contemporary problems, problems of slavery and freedom, problems of social inequality and inequity, like that. I cannot say that I have delved deep into the eternal problems, something like that, through the medium of my literature. I have been mainly concerned with these problems which are apparent on the surface of society, more or less.
Say, for example, Changampuya in those days was doing more or less the same thing, using poetry as a means of change. Now, why did you revolt against that tradition?
In India, nobody doubted about the social relevance or social utility of literature. Even from the very beginning, One of the most important purpose of literature was conceived to be didactic. But then the idea of art for art's sake and all those things came. And at the time of Changambura was to begin with completely severed or detached from the national movement which was going on here. He was mainly concerned with juvenile or, well, that sort of emotions and all those things, the budding love and all those things, the frustrations of the lovers and all those things. I could not agree with his outlook. I thought that while the most important problem before the country is attainment of freedom and removal of poverty and removal of social injustices, this total absorption in juvenile emotions is harmful. Well, that was my idea. And I thought that unless we bring concrete social purpose into poetry, poetry will become weak and superfluous.
But you have been harping on the necessity of form and the perfection of structure,
Yes.
conscious artistry and all that.
Well, I have been nurtured on the classical Sanskrit language, and the insistence on the form, insistence on the art of poetry was there from the very beginning. Unless poetry keeps its form and strength and beauty, it cannot perform any of the functions, including the didactic function. Therefore, I thought that to begin with, poetry should first be poetry, and second, it should have serious social concerns.
You have had some experience on the stage of Kerala, both writing Kathakali,
Yes.
Prabandhas
Yes.
and dramas. Now what have you to say on the improvement of the stage?
Well, speaking about Kathakali, I was asked to contribute something to the Buddha Jayanti festivals, and that way some contribution which could be distinctive of Kerala, and that was why I wrote Buddha Charitam Kathakali, the Kathakali play in 1956. Then during the Tagore centenary celebrations, I was asked to one of his works into a Kathakali play, and that was how in 1961 I wrote the play Chitrangada. Of course, these have been staged, and I think these two plays have proved that the medium of Kathakali stage can be adapted to the contemporary needs. Stage has a very important part to play in the emerging society. Stage has been very important in India, in ancient Indian society. The Bharata, the originator of dramatics in India, is always referred to as Muni, the great sage, by others. And stage had a very important role in the development of Kerala culture also. A lot has been done and a lot remains to be done to make it a lively, powerful institution.
Now critics have often pointed out that in your poetry there is a change from the old narrative style to a new kind of philosophical approach and vision. Of course, you got the national award for a critical treatise and not for poetry, but what is your experience? Say from Neenda Kavithakal, when you come to Kalladaivangal, there is a different dimension and a philosophical approach.
When I started writing poetry, as I told you, my idea was to express powerful emotions which may contribute in some way or other, if not directly, indirectly at least, to the national awakening. Then in 1944, I went to Madras and stayed there for 3 years. And during this period, I had occasion to make a wide study of world poetry. I was also living in a big city, a megalopolis, and what they call the sense of alienation, I could myself experience. The modern trend in poetry, I thought has a certain relevance in the Indian context, and from that period onwards, the sort of change in my poetic trend may be visible. Then from the very beginning I was concerned with the problems, the deeper problems of society, deeper cultural problems, the spiritual problems and these things. Probably as time went on, the more than contemporary problems, I began to give importance to these deeper and eternal problems.
A personal question, what made you write a poem entitled An Essay on Death?
Well, I was admitted to a medical hospital here, Medical College Hospital and had to undergo a surgery. Then during the compulsory days of idleness, I could think about the problem of death, the problem of soul, rebirth, relation between life and non-life and all these things. It was somehow or other I wrote a poem, but in fact it was an essay on these deeper questions. The form was that of a lyrical poem, that is all.
About your work in criticism, the general feeling is that you haven't spoken out much, which means you have written only so little, whereas you could have written so much. I would like to know about the occasion which made you write criticism. You have picked up controversies, so many. When you were the president of the Sahitya Akademi during the first Jnanapidam award conferring,
Yes.
and something like poetry's growth is stunted.
Yes.
A statement you made, poetry's growth is stunted, and then there was a controversy following that. Now, what made you actually embark on the field of criticism and pick up controversies?
Even before I took up the profession of journalism, I had several of my friends asked to contribute introductions to their works. For example, Edashiri asked me to write an introduction to his famous play Kootu Krishi before it was published. That way I had to study their works and evaluate them and write essays on them as to fit in the introduction. Probably my criticism started through these introductions. Then when I became a journalist, sometimes I had to review books and sometimes I had to express an opinion in a raging controversy, and somehow or other some of my statements, well, they invited unnecessary controversy and became topics of literary conversation for considerable time. This idea of the stunted growth of poetry, when I reviewed a collection of poems by one of my friends, poet Olapavanna, I felt that his standard had definitely gone below that attained by his previous collections, and I expressed that his poetry is becoming standard. But few people read that review. Only the heading of that review was very, very popular, and they thought that I had said that the time of poetry is over and now the time of prose has come, something like that, and that way a controversy came up. With regard to the Jnanapith Award, the question was the relevance or the significance of Shankara Kurup as a poet in Malayalam literature. That was the problem. Kurup, though a great poet, one of the greatest poets of Kerala, as I conceive him, had a large number of literary enemies, and there was a campaign against him, whispering campaign, a writing campaign, a campaign in the corridors of power, like that. When I took up the cudgels for Shankara Kurup, that became a raging controversy, because already Kurup had been the target of attacks from several corners.
So these controversies were coming in their own way.
Yes.
And they were not consciously...
No, they were not consciously engineered by me.
Some of us doubt that you had a design of stirring up the intellectual life, which is otherwise dormant.
I don't claim that. Even I had been the cause of several controversies. I never wanted them, and at the time of the controversies I felt that I felt very sorry that I had created so much confusion. Of course, clarity came afterwards. Confusion came first from these controversies.
You had been the editor of a Hindi journal for a long time, and I would like to know what are your experiences with the Hindi or the North Indian writers?
When the states were reorganized on linguistic basis and Kerala came, we thought that now the regional languages will be used for administrative and educational purposes in the states, and in order to bring about cultural unity in India, we will have to make use of Hindi in all the states as a vehicle of higher cultural activities. In Kerala, therefore, we thought that a Hindi fortnightly or a weekly is a necessity. That was how the Madhurumi began to publish Yuga Prabhat, and I had been the editor of Yuga Prabhat for 12 years. Then when I left, Mr. Ravi Verma, who was assisting me, became the editor for another, I think, 6 or 7 years. When Sri Ravi Verma also retired, the paper became defunct. Now, as the editor of this weekly, I had a very rich, satisfying experience. I had a wide-ranging cooperation from writers and cultural workers in the Hindi area. Dr. Rajendra Prasad, who was Rashtrapati at that time, he used to contribute yearly one article to our weekly. He was very much interested in this the Yuga Prabhat fortnightly. There were also others who used to contribute continuously to our weekly, our fortnightly, I mean, Yuga Prabhat. Then we were able to translate a large number of poems, short stories and other literary translators from the Dravidian languages, Tamil, Telugu, Karnataka, and also from Malayalam in Hindi. That way, if we were not able to popularize South Indian literature in the north, we were able at least to popularize regional literatures in the four states of South India. The Telugu writings through Hindi became available to Malayalis in Yuga Prabhat. That way it was a powerful organ of integration. But we had no selling agencies in the north where this fortnightly should have circulated. Our circulation was very poor. Our advertisement support was also not good. And the paper continued to make a loss from year to year. That was how it had to be closed. Even now I doubt very much if a Hindi paper from South India can be an economic success because of we cannot get much circulation in South.
There is a tendency that the north is north and the south is south, and the twain shall never meet. Have you felt it, sir?
No, I have never felt it. I have always been welcomed very warmly in other regions of India. For example, I have a large number of good friends in Tamil Nadu. I have also Andhra friends, friends in Hindi area, friends in Bengal. Wherever I have been, I have felt the strong identity of interest and the internal unity that is very, very evident, that is very strong, very permanent, everlasting in the Indian cultural field. I have never felt that the south is entirely different from the north or anything like that. In fact, the interaction between the south and the north has been the main frame on which Indian culture has grown. The south has contributed a lot to the growth of Sanskrit literature, Indian philosophy, Indian architecture, arts, everything. The same way the north has also given its part. The Indian culture is a composite culture, and the contribution of south is very significant in it.
Now you have been able to come into contact with some of the luminaries in the Indian horizon.
Yes.
You have your own personal contacts. Could you mention some of the unforgettable persons and events which you have come across?
As a political worker, I had somewhat closely associated myself with a large number of people. I have been an admirer of Mahatma Gandhi, and I consider it my good fortune that I could follow him for 3 or 4 days in Madras as a volunteer during his stay in the Hindi Pradar Sabha. I have accompanied Jawaharlal Nehru in one of his tours of Malabar as interpreter, and I have also met him several times at his residence and other places. I have also very warm personal memories of Mrs. Indira Gandhi. She had been never missed an occasion to associate herself with functions of the Language Institute while I was the director. Then I have also been an interpreter for Dr. Radhakrishnan when he addressed the Vattapalam Sahitya Parishad. I have also met him at his residence several times. Coming to Kerala, as a writer, as the secretary of Sahitya Samiti, as the secretary of Malabar Kendra Kala Samiti, and as the editor of Madhurumi Weekly and Kumkum Weekly, then the director of Language Institute, I have come into contact with almost all contemporary writers in Kerala, and have associated very closely with many of them. 3 of my greatest friends who have made my life what it is are Sri Mahakavi G. Shankaraguru, Sri Patekad, and Sri P.C. Kutishn, Urub. They have been with Urub and Patekad. My associations have been very long, very close, and very, very cordial. And in my generation as well as in the later generation, I have a large number of very good friends, very close friends with whom I share many of my interests. That way, I have been also very fortunate in my associations with people. I have very long association with Sri K.P. Keshav Menon, one of the greatest persons who lived in contemporary Kerala. Then I have been associated with Sri Damodara Menon, K.A. Damodara Menon, P. Narayan Nair. During the Aikya Kerala movement, we worked very closely together, Keshav Menon, Damodara Menon, Narayan Nair and myself. Most of the poets, I have known Vallatol very closely, even though I have met Ullur only for a couple of times. I have very close association with Vallatol, and Vallatol had a very affectionate regard for me. That is my impression. Then Kunjiravan Nair and others, well, I have tried to popularize their poems. I have contributed introductions to many of their collections, and they regarded me as a very intimate friend, as one among them. That way, my life as a journalist has been enriched by this number of friendships. As I told you, I have also friends outside Kerala, literary friends, and that their warmth, their affection, their love, these are the permanent assets of my life.
What about your teachers, old teachers?
Well, being a student of Sanskrit, I had only a few teachers, but these teachers continue to teach me for long years. Mr. Keshav Nalayat, my first Sanskrit teacher, he was my teacher for about 6 years, and I learnt much from him. I learned all the Kavya, Nadaga and all that sort of literature from him, and he was very fond of me. And while I was studying under him, one day he wrote a sloka, 2 lines, Nikate mama sotsaham Krishna pathati samskritam. I remember it still, and that is one of the greatest certificates I have received in my life. Then, of course, there was Shankaranarayan Shastri, one of the greatest scholars of grammar, not only in Kerala but also in India. He taught me for 4 years higher text in Sanskrit grammar. There was Ramapusharidi, the great commentator on literary criticism and dramas. There were also several other teachers. I was associated with Swami Agamanandaji of Ramakrishna Mission for several years, and my association with him has given me an insight into what the Ramakrishna Vivekananda movement was about, and that has also played a great role in shaping my personality. That way I have the circle of friends and associates is very big, and that is which has made my life what it is.